We're talking to interim directors of surgical services and SPD managers and OR educators about their unique experiences leading departments on a temporary basis. Today we have Gayle Fox, and Gayle Fox has been an awesome road warrior for Whitman Partners. And we are looking so forward to talking to you and getting your input about what you do and how you do it, and just kind of pick your brain over these things. So, Gayle, welcome.
Thank you so much, John. It is really an honor to be a part of this program.
Well, thank you again. And I've got so many questions for you, and I'm going to make sure I ask the most important ones. But
Oh,
if we,
good.
so we could jump into it right now.
Perfect.
So, when you're interviewing for these positions, what
Uh-huh.
questions do you ask before accepting a new assignment?
Well, I usually start out with, because I am either interviewing with a chief operating officer or a chief nursing officer to begin it. And what the main thing that I find to be important is I ask them what gives them heartburn about perioperative services or keeps them up at night.
Hmm.
And that can launch into where they feel it really opens a dialogue for what's going on within the department.
Hmm.
So that's the first thing I always ask.
Hmm. That's a great response. And boy, that could lead to a long conversation to
It
get to.
does, and it's kind of an out of the blue, offside, tangential question.
Mhm.
So they may have already, because they've interviewed multiple people through their careers, and it kind of gets them off of that scripted track to
Mm.
really what's going on.
That sounds great. I love conversational interviews. That's awesome.
Indeed.
Um, Next question is, usually interims are walking into a powder keg. Here we go. We're going right where you're leading it. Um, how quickly do you calm everyone's fears about new leadership?
It usually takes me about 3 to 4 days.
Hmm.
Apologize. It usually takes about 3 to 4 days. And that being said, um, interims are accustomed to being dropped into the 7 levels of Hades all of a sudden, right? Usually there's been no leaders, or there's, been huge gaps. And so my style is very relational. And part of what I do is just really get into the department from the beginning. I'm not one who comes in and I'm changing blah, 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 but I usually will have a meeting with the staff. I'll give them my background, and then I will ask them, so do you really think that I've got the background and skills to do this role? And that usually leads to a bit of humor.
Mhm.
And then from then on, I'm kind of just there in the department with them, having a presence, making them know that I am not in 5 days going to change the staffing, do this, do that.
Hmm. Excellent. So, in the same vein, what are your tips for gaining the confidence of the staff within those first weeks? What are you doing to make them feel more comfortable with this big change?
What makes them feel comfortable is knowing the credibility that I started out um, at the table scrubbing cases as a nurse. So as you get into conversation, they understand that their world. You may not, I may not be as fast and as skilled as I was when I was scrubbing all the time. I could still do it if I had to.
Right.
And part of that is also storytelling. It's
Mm.
kind of giving them stories of like, oh gosh, we had this experience or I had that experience, because that gives you a humanness that
Mm.
allows them to trust you.
That's an excellent point. And that's a great tip. Um, so what challenges do you see repeatedly that most affects revenue?
Oh, uh, what I see is, well, excuse me, you've got the efficiencies in the operating room. So when you're not capturing, usually the statistic for many facilities, most facilities, is OR minutes and not cases. So when you don't have um, a patient in the room and a surgeon operating, that's loss of revenue. And that can be attributed to a lot of broken processes. What's causing you delays? What about delays in turnover? So it's that piece first. Second piece is I see, it's funny you asked this because in my current assignment, we've just been building the budget for the fiscal year coming up. And what I see a lot is misallocation of uh, items into sub accounts that don't flow over, missing charges. And that goes back into a preference card build. How clean is the preference cards? And how much do the nurses in the room have to charge by exception? So I see that as a big problem. Another thing I see is vendor management,
Mm.
because when you're absent in when you have an absence of leadership, um, you have surgeons who don't want to tell vendors no in their office, send them over to the OR and just say, hey, we'll try this new product without the vendor. And we know it's more expensive without the vendor going through the appropriate channels. So it's being the gatekeeper for that as well.
That's excellent. So then when you get started, what does that checklist look like for you on that first day?
Oh, okay. The first day, I don't even delve into that.
Yeah.
The first day, the first couple of days, usually when you're a seasoned leader, in about 3 days, you can see the process of throughput. You can see how the patients are getting to the OR. Are they prepared? Just your observation and assessment skills. As nurses, we are trained in assessment skills. However, as an interim leader, it is something you absolutely hone. And you can look at a situation and know exactly what the flaws and the landmines are about it. So
Mhm.
that's kind of where I start, just have it being present, watching the flow, and then as you get into that, then you start seeing, because it will be coming your way about, well, this charge was missed or this, and then you start delving into that piece of it.
Mm. That's excellent response. Uh, so I'm getting into the ageism issues that can
Yes,
be out there. Um, interims typically are, skewed towards the seasoned side, as I always like to call it,
that's what I
uh,
like to call it.
because I'm seasoned. Um,
Yes,
so
indeed.
and along with that comes experience.
Right.
So have you ever been a victim of ageism? And if so, can you tell a, a you know, a redacted version of it?
Um, yes, as a matter of fact. And I actually find back when looking for permanent solutions, right? If I was not doing the interim, and I've been doing interim off and on for probably, uh, God, 10 years now.
Mm,
And in those scenarios where sometimes I think, okay, I need to be off the road for a little bit or something. I really find that first of all, with that, the person that you're reporting to really maybe doesn't have a grasp on your interim career. Because I've been asked many, many times, oh, you look like you jump around a lot. And you have to educate them. But secondly, I find it more from the permanent venue because I guess they feel that you just don't have the energy level to keep up, or you're um, kind of looking for a place just to rest on your laurels.
mm,
But in an interim, usually there's a very big difference with the interims because, to your point, interims are seasoned. And, you know, age comes with being seasoned and experience. And when you describe your background
mhm.
in that interview, they recognize that, well, you can't have all this experience if you haven't been in the business for a minute or two.
Mm,
And they value the fact that you have all of these, I call them facets to draw from.
mhm. Well, that is a very good response to that question, because I'm thinking then I want to ask you some advice.
Please do.
Um, Give me some advice on something that you've learned during the pandemic that has changed the way you work and operate in the workplace assignments that you've had.
Well, the experience during the pandemic actually added another facet to the perioperative landscape. Many of the hospital that I happened to be with at that time, as ordered by mandates of the governors, go into what they called surgery modulation. Now, in your normal course of day operations, and I say normal because it's only a setting on the dryer to me, right? In the course of usual and customary operations, you're juggling the schedule. You've got an urgent or emergent case that needs to be bumped, so you've got that. But during the pandemic, all elective cases were suspended, and they came across in different degrees. So at that point in time, they were only permitting urgent or emergent cases. And every day, a panel got together of the physician leaders to review cases that were on this schedule as to, okay, what needs to be done, what needs to be put on hold a little bit. Um, so you looked at a very different model in doing your daily cases. Now, to that point as well, what you faced was a hospital that had an ICU that was full of patients. And so your worry then is bedding these patients after they get out of
Mm,
the operating room. Now, usually you have that challenge with throughput on some days, but this was to a greater degree on how you were looking at your caseload, because every case that was in there was urgent or emergent. I happened to be at a level 1 trauma center at that time. So traumas come sans pandemic, COVID or not. My volume really only dipped by about 33% because I got all of the, the traumas and those urgents coming in. And the other thing was staffing, because uh, if you weren't doing work, the staff that you had to be deployed because you want them to continue with a paycheck.
Mhm.
So staff that you didn't really need were being deployed to other areas to do things that just even help pass trays, do something like that. And it was, every day you're listening to the CDC guidelines and the infectious disease doctor running it at the hospital. But I had a excellent chief nurse executive officer who's very forward thinking. And this is a 600 bed hospital, of how to utilize. And every day I would meet with my team and say, all right, how many staff can you give up today? How many don't you need? Put them into the labor pool so that they could assist with in other areas of the hospital. So I guess you could say it was more crisis staffing and crisis operations, literally not like surgical operations, but crisis operations, um, that you learned during that time.
Yeah. I could only imagine the flexibility and the constant change that you went through during that process to be able to adjust and provide the care.
Yes, yes. And, vendors weren't allowed in, families weren't allowed in, physicians were having to learn how to use their equipment without some support.
Hmm, good point. Well, this next question is more about someone looking to go into being an interim. Some pre-op leaders are afraid to do that and go into interim because they believe it may look negatively on their resume. What's your experience on how interim work is perceived by hospitals, facilities, and hiring managers?
Um, how it's perceived by some is a necessary evil,
Hmm.
meaning they need somebody and they can't get along without us.
Mm.
And of course, sometimes I've seen it where rather than hit their budget with a full-time employee, they would rather they'll bring in an interim for a period of time because the money goes into a different bucket in the revenue cycle.
Mm.
So that's a piece of it as well.
Mhm. Interesting. Um, so here's a little bit different of a question for you.
Okay.
Given that you travel so much and you've had so many assignments and all that experience, talking about airports, what's the best airport food which airport has the best food? Is that
I would have
possible?
to, oh, well, yeah, I would have to say O'Hare has the best choice. They have the
Mhm.
best choices. Okay.
Okay.
Now you'll find out there's a good restaurant in Phoenix when you go there. There's a good place in, maybe some other really obscure little airport. Once I was stuck over Mother's Day weekend at DFW in a tornado. And so 3 days we lived there. And unfortunately, the only restaurant they had in that terminal was Chili's. I really don't ever want to see a Chili's again. Okay.
And so I have one last question,
Yes, sir.
because I realize this can be somewhat situational depending on what the need is in these facilities when you interview with them. Um,
Yeah.
so how do you distinguish yourself during an interview to win that assignment?
Well, they go through their standard canned questions, but I think what I use is my background. I will share with them my background at in all venues, meaning academic, non-for-profit, for-profit, mission-based non-for-profit. So experiences there, experiences with sizes of ORs that I've run, um, and and also sharing that, during one part of my life, I was a practice administrator. And as a practice administrator, you understand what the OR is asking from the physicians for preparation of their patients. So I offer that as a facet of my role. And that helps with the physician relations. Although, I'm very relational in my style. Situational, yes, but relational in my style. And so I think when they see that it's almost the full complement, that is what helps them to understand. And I've had CEOs and uh, chief medical officers ask me, "So, Gail, is there anything you haven't seen?" And I say to them, "Well, I hate to say no, because I'll tell you tomorrow it's going to come." And so,
How true. How true. That is great advice, and being able to share that with me. Thank you. Uh, and I just want to thank you for being such a key part of making Whitman Partners successful. As a road warrior for 2022, it's a privilege to be able to say that you're one of those road warriors,
it's
and
hard
one of
to say, huh?
it is. I'm, that's why I asked the questions. But I just want to thank you for all you've done, and just wish you all the best. And thank you again for taking the time to talk to me today.
Well, thank you so very much. And it is indeed my honor to be a part of Whitman and be in the stable, if you will, because, through my career, I have been with I've had assignments through various other interim companies. And we seem to always gravitate back to being together again. So I'm very, very honored and humbled to be a part of Whitman and be so well thought of by the organization.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you taking your valuable time to talk to me today. And Gail, I wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you much.